Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Be the Church podcast, where we are engaging in conversations that will encourage you to live out your faith in everyday context so that you can be the church. I'm your producer, Isaiah.
I'm one of your hosts, Kevin.
And I'm your other host, David.
Wonderful. Welcome to the podcast. Today, we are continuing our series talking through some questions from Skeptics. Not only are we continuing it, but today is our last episode on this series. So before we hop into our overview,
at least for now.
Yeah, for now. You're right. Maybe we'll have a special appearance later. But before we hop into an overview of the series, I will remind you all to reach out to us at podcast@aletheigainesville.com if you have further questions or ideas for the podcast. We love any and all ideas. And if you just want to continue the conversation of what we're talking about today, and just get more clarification or process through some stuff, we are happy to hear from you. And if you want a more in-depth understanding of why and how we go through these discussions with others, I encourage you to check out our first episode of the series. So, as we do with every episode in the series, the first thing we want to do is give you a quick overview of the series we're doing. So, David, why are we doing this Answering Skeptics series?
Yeah, we're convinced that we're called to give a defense of our faith,
Absolutely.
Both to unbelievers and even believers who are wrestling with these questions, based on 1 Peter 3:15 and 16 that tell us that, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. And so our desire is to help the church body both process and think through many of these questions that are asked both by unbelievers and Christians within the church, and how to kind of process and think through these questions biblically. And so we want to help believers think and thinkers believe.
That is always one of my favorite lines because I think it just rolls off the tongue and it really does make a lot of sense. Absolutely. Kevin, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just mean like this podcast is a ministry arm of our church, and the reason why we, record it and do it is that we want to engage, encourage, equip, and empower people as they walk in their faith, and no matter where they are in their spiritual journey. We want this podcast to be a resource to help do that. And one of the ways we can help encourage, equip, and empower you as the listener is to process through these questions, whether they're doubts or just things you've considered about your faith inwardly and personally, because I think doubt is a normal part of the Christian experience. But we also want to equip and empower you so that you might address the heart questions and objections of those who are not yet of the faith, who you may be investing in and have relationships with. So we believe that there's an inward and an outward component to thinking through these types of questions. And hopefully, there have been people that have written books on these questions. There are people that have done like far more in-depth podcasts. The goal of this is for us to more so give a primer so that you can see, hey, there are some just, maybe base level or foundational level answers that the scriptures have to these types of questions, so that you might have a foundation to launch from in doing your own research and kind of going on your own journey of discovery of figuring out what God's word might say about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that overview, we'll now move into the question of today's episode, which isn't Christianity exclusive, and why can't we all just get along? So I think this really gets at, a big heart struggle here in, especially in our culture today. So to start off, David, why don't you help clarify the question a little?
Yeah, so I think because it is two questions, I I kind of went back and forth on how to synthesize both of these questions into one. And the simplest way that it worked out in my mind was, the first question is kind of given as almost like assumed, right? So I would say it's almost better to just ask it as a state or just state it and then lead on to the second question. So like Christianity is exclusive. It has exclusive claims, which we'll talk a little bit about what that means in a second. Then if that's true, which Christians are very much inclined to say yes, then that means like Christians, like we can't all get along. Christians can't get along with other people. This is why Christians can't get along, right? Because because of one, then the other is true. So the question is basically, I think, more of a statement than a question, which is why I had a really rough time kind of parsing it out.
Sure.
But I think that's kind of like the nature of this question is like, if Christianity is making exclusive claims, this is why we can't get along. This is why there's so much butting of heads. And I guess we're going to try to kind of answer both parts of that question, not just, I guess, assume the answers.
Yeah, and I think a really big idea in the cultural sphere, a word that kind of hits on this, I think, is the idea of coexist. And why can't Christianity just do what it does and let others do what they do? So, like, why can't we all just get along? And why do we have to argue and, be strong in all these opinions and postures with our religions today? Because a lot of people would posit like, hey, just you do your thing, we'll do our thing, and, it'll all be good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you use that word coexist. I don't know if that's as common now as maybe it was 10, 15 years ago, but I think the premise behind it still exists in a lot of people's mind, at least here in the United States. But when I think of the word coexist, I mean, my definition of it, and again, this is just my definition, but I think this is what the goal of the word is that there is the ability for two competing ideas or worldviews to both exist inside of the same system, culture, nation, office, whatever it may be. And I believe that the spirit of this idea is that two different religions or more than that, multiple different religions or worldviews can exist in the same place amongst the same people. And if there was to be any friction among the worldviews, so where places where the truth claims of each individual worldview disagree with one another, right? That they could settle those differences over the basis of the merits of the worldview or religious teachings, whether they're truthful, helpful, etc., and not through violence and destruction. I think that's what we're ultimately getting at. Like, hey, Christianity and Judaism and Islam and Buddhism can all coexist one another, but there's still the ability to be able to have charitable conversations and debates amongst one another. And if that is the definition of coexist, and again, I don't think that's necessarily how it's being practiced, but I think words matter, and I think that's what the word would lead me to believe that it should be defined as. And if that's the definition, then my answer to like this question just in general is, yeah, absolutely. Christianity can absolutely do this. As a matter of fact, I think C.S. Lewis gives a helpful distinction in Mere Christianity on this very point. He says, if you are a Christian, you do not have to believe that all other religions are simply wrong all through. If you are an atheist, you do have to believe that the main point in all the religions of the whole world is simply one huge mistake. If you are a Christian, you are free to think that all these religions, even the queerest ones, contain at least some hint of the truth. When I was an atheist, I had to try to persuade myself that most of the human race have always been wrong about the question that mattered to them the most. When I became a Christian, I was able to take a more liberal view. But, of course, being a Christian does mean thinking that where Christianity differs from other religions, Christianity is right and they are wrong. As in arithmetic, there is only one right answer to a sum, and all other answers are wrong. but some of the wrong answers are much nearer being right than others. And, anyone that's ever done math on a piece of paper knows that you could have the wrong answer, but if you showed your work and were like 75% of the way there, your teacher might give you partial credit for at least heading down the right path.
Right. And I think what's really nice about that too is it does actually, I think, in different realms allow us to engage better with different people as Christians. And I know for me, when I worked at the English Languages Institute, I was with a lot of international students, and I got along a lot better with some of the Muslim students than I did with my own coworkers, because morally we have a lot of similar foundations.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I've been recently even, my family had a international couple from Turkey over to our house recently and had a great time, and so glad that they could come over, and they've been attending our church for a while now, and both come from a Muslim background. And one of the things that's interesting when we talk about Jesus with the two of them, the husband in particular mentions regularly, I don't have problems with believing that Jesus could do the things that he did, because I believe in God, and belief in God leads me to believe that all of these things are possible. I'm still testing whether I think they're actually true or not, and what that means for me. And he's in a really, really honest place. And I think Christians can do the same things. I mean, I'm especially early on in my faith, I was regularly studying other religions and seeing other things, because there is the aspect of, at the end of the day, right, when you're an adherent to a philosophical worldview or a religion, hopefully you're doing that on the basis of you think it's true and it's right. Mm-hmm. And I think even though C.S. Lewis is in Mere Christianity here, trying to make a distinction between atheism and Christianity ultimately, I wanted to share this quote because I think he shows that there is the possibility for coexistence if you take this kind of mindset. And admittedly, I don't want to sweep this under the rug. There are people inside of Christian thought that don't hold to this position, but I would think that they are wrong. I would think that I don't know what word I would use, maybe bully or heavy-handed in the way that they want to handle like intellectual discourse and conversation or whatever else. But I do believe that there are places where we can develop rapport and common ground with people, and then in that rapport and common ground, still hold firm to what we believe to be true about Jesus. And I believe as Christians, at the end of the day, we can objectively look at many religions and see some merit or truth in them. Ultimately, though, we would reject their final level of helpfulness or truthfulness because we believe that Jesus Christ is who he claimed to be. And if he is who he claimed to be, that is profoundly important. And ultimately, it's exclusively true, right? Either Jesus is God in the flesh who died and rose again for the sins of mankind, or he's not. And if he did, it has profound implications on the entire planet. And if it's not true, personally, I think you could probably dismiss everything Jesus says, but that's a different discussion for a different time.
Ooh, the resurrection. But no, to bring our attention back, I did not mean to confuse or distract. I think something that Kevin is really getting at, which if you go all the way back to episode 1 in this series, we talked about if you're having a discussion with someone and they're bringing up a question, you must define your terms, right? Because again, all of everything we just said, everything Kevin just said, Isaiah just said, only makes sense with the working definition of coexist that you guys were using, right? To somebody else, coexisting, right? Like if their definition is, hey, can't Christians just coexist, which means you just turn a blind eye and you say everybody's religion is as valid and as true as mine, then clearly what Kevin just said, if you believe the statements of Christ, of who he is as a person and how he is the only individual in which we can have hope and salvation, if that's an exclusive claim, then by that definition, we can't coexist. Yeah. Right. And so this,
or at least we're going to have problems coexisting the way you want us.
Right.
To.
According to again, and I want to stress, according to that definition. Right. And so this is just giving us a clear cut example, I think, of that initial episode and what we were saying, like why it's so important to make sure we're defining the terms that we're using so that then we can properly give honest answers, not dishonest ones. And so I know we highlighted that at the beginning of the year of the series. I just wanted to bring it up. And like we said, and we've said this over and over every single episode, right? Like there are clear and exclusive tenets of Christianity that are held to be true, not just in Scripture, but that Christians have held onto and affirmed and reiterated over and over and over again. Like the likes of like the exclusivity of Jesus as being our only way to the Father. Statements in the Bible where God clearly tells people that there's no one like him, right? And even like the New Testament author claimed that Jesus wasn't just God, but that he died and resurrected from the dead, and that it is only through hope and faith in him that we can be brought near to God and avoid eternal damnation and punishment, right? Like all of those are quite exclusive claims. And so as Christians, we don't shy away from that. I think the bigger question that is probably at the core of this mindset is what does it mean to coexist or to get along? Like what practically does that look like? Especially considering some of the claims that we've been bringing up. In a lot of these situations, this doesn't mean that like a Christian, just because they hold these tenets or these truths to be reality, that we have to go out of our way and like disturb the peace or just pick fights with people whenever we can. Like that's ultimately like not what we're called. I read the passage that has kind of guided this whole discussion, and we're actually called to do things peaceably and to give arguments in gentleness and in love. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to make it sound like, yes, Christianity is exclusive, and that means we must also absolutely be disruptive all the time. But to some, like the reality that I think we're working our way towards is not everybody will have that same definition of coexist. And to certain people, especially within our generation, I would say, if you disagree with me, that is an act of violence, that is an act of hate, that is, and so in those situations, even when we are doing our very part to live peaceably, to present our case in gentleness and in love, to some, by definition, just disagreements is basically none of those things, which I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but I think we can't ignore the exclusivity and the exclusive statements of Christianity, and I definitely think with regards to what we're commanded to do, we can adhere to that and defend that in a gentle and loving way without compromising what the statements and tenets of Christianity are.
Yeah, I mean, really, the reality is the question we need to get to before we can even really answer this question for people is what defines getting along or coexisting. Mm-hmm. I mean, Christian denominations have tried to figure this out with one another. Christianity has been trying to figure this out amongst other faiths, trying to figure this out amongst atheists. I mean, there are all sorts of ways in which humanity has been parsing through this question for years. But as always, if someone has brought this question up, I think for you, if you're listening to this and you're a Christian and someone's raised this question towards you before because of your faith or whatever else, I think we've prefaced pretty much almost every single episode we've done with this type of question. You need to understand the framework and reasoning for their question in the first place. And so, finding out and asking questions is a helpful place to do that. If I was asked this question before I ever even tried to answer the question of whether Christianity can get along with people, which I promise we are going to get to that here in just a second, but we need to ask, like, what is their standard for coexistence? What is their definition? What does that mean? And then something I like to do, and again, this is admittedly a little bit more critical thinking, but you need to consider and question whether their position actually stands up to scrutiny and basic philosophical inquiry. So like, for example, right, Philosophy 101, the law of non-contradiction. Can my view stand up to scrutiny when it is turned back on itself? So like, if we want to go back to the example that David shared earlier about coexistence and like, I don't think you should push your views on someone else or whatever else. Like immediately, the moment someone says that to me, I dismiss them. And I don't mean I dismiss them as a person, but I dismiss their position. And the reason I do that is because they feel philosophically the power and the freedom to place and force their view of exclusivity and their exclusive truth of you can't hold to your exclusive truth. That's ultimately what they're pushing there. It's a contradiction, right? Where I wouldn't hold that same thing. I was like, you're allowed to hold whatever you want. I just don't think it's true.
Right.
Right. There's a very real difference between those two things.
And you're open to them having the same assumption of like you can hold whatever you're open to someone being convinced that your view is not true and having that dialogue, which is what you're expecting of them.
100%. I am confident that in the truthfulness and the merits of Christianity.
Right.
I have tested them and walked through them time and time again. And over the course of nearly the last 20 years of my life have walked away more convinced that Jesus of Nazareth is who he claimed to be, not less. And so I'm always open for a discussion and a debate. I think oftentimes when this is presented to people, and you need to understand this if you're listening, this type of language is used to be a silencer, but being done so in a way that sounds morally superior. But if you take things to their logical conclusion, you can actually get underneath of what's actually going on. And that's super important. I think one of the other things I like to do if I'm trying to understand what someone's doing is see if they actually live out the implications of this worldview. Experience has taught me that many do not consistently live out what they claim to say they believe. This goes for Christians and opponents of Christianity.
Right.
But if you're going to tell me that you're super open-minded and you want everyone to coexist, like, does that actually carry over in the way that you live and treat people? Because I think at least in our current cultural moment, the at least, and I don't want to make it sound like Christians are like super duper oppressed in the United States. They're not. But I do think that in my lifetime, I'll be 39 this year, there's definitely been a movement from, if any of you are familiar with an author by the name of Aaron Renn, he's got a book out called Life in the Negative World. And he talks about how at least in the United States, the cultural perception or feeling towards Christianity as a whole was once positive, then was neutral, and now is in a negative position, at least in the power structures of popular culture, media, et cetera. And so that is something that you face if you're listening to this as a Christian. But I think there's a reality that oftentimes people will use a very universalistic type of language to describe how they interact with religions, but then when they come up against Christianity, they're actually not that neutral or universal or open-minded towards it. And so I like to challenge people on that. And ultimately, I would just hold this. Because Christianity, because it in the United States has been the predominant religion of many here, and I would argue that in many ways, the Europeans that colonized the United States came here for a freedom of religion and specifically a freedom of practicing their particular brand of Christianity. I would hold, though, that Christianity as a whole has been far more tolerant of opposing worldviews historically than other religions and worldviews. Now, that's open for debate, and we don't have time to get into that. And admittedly, and here's what I would say, admittedly, that's a low bar. I don't mean that. I don't want to make it sound like, man, Christians are like what we should aim to be. Every society that's been predominantly Christian has done this awesome job. But it's a low bar because human beings just tend not to tolerate differences within power structures and things that they sit within. So overall, first answer to this question, yes, Christianity is exclusive and proudly so. because we truly do believe the claims and things that we believe about who Jesus Christ is. But Christians are also able to peacefully coexist with people from different cultures, backgrounds, races, worldviews, and even cooperate with other worldviews, so long as there is an understanding that Christians have a deeply held belief on the importance of sharing their faith and message of who Jesus Christ is through reason and persuasion. And if you do not want to talk about those types of things with a Christian, you need to understand that you are asking them to surrender something that is really core to who they are. Yeah. And we can get into debates on like whether they should be allowed to do that. I would say like if you eventually asked me to stop talking to you, I would respect that from you, and I would, but I would also ask that you would understand that I want to have that conversation with you though, because I truly believe it's value and important to you.
Yeah, no, I think that's really insightful to kind of see how evangelism does play into a Christian worldview, and it is a huge part of what we do. But we can do that peaceably, and we can do that mindfully, but also expressing that in this idea of coexist in a proper framework, like we aren't just going to sit back and not be silent, because it's, just like people talk about sports when they love sports, like we love Jesus. That is the most important thing to us. We want to talk about Jesus. And so in the same way, we long for peace and, this idea of coexist, but we will be bold in just being open about who we are and what we care about.
Yeah. I mean, I think when you think about Christianity, just like holistically, right? We believe that Jesus Christ is God in the flesh who has revealed God the Father to us, and that through him, he paid the penalty for our rebellion towards our Creator and died and rose again to give us victory and new life, and has given us the helper, the Holy Spirit, to help us navigate this life as we wait to be fully restored and worship and spend eternity with him. Like, that's a pretty awesome thing to believe. And you may not believe it as you listen to it, but that is what Christians historically have believed for thousands of years. Maybe that will help you then understand why Christians want to share that truth with people. I mean, Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. It's an exclusive truth claim. Jesus tells his disciples that they will be his witnesses. He doesn't say like, hey, you should go do this. Hey, like this might be something you would consider. Right. Like he's like, no, this is just going to be what you're going to do. And I think there's this reality to understand. And in the same way, by the way, if you were of a different religion or philosophy or persuasion and you thought that you could rescue me and really, I mean, lead me to happiness and joy and experience in this life, I would be really disappointed if you didn't care about me enough to share that truth with me. Now, if I reject it and reject it and reject it and reject it, I get how you would probably tailor how often you're going to share it and talk about it with me. But the reality is Christians truly believe that this is the most foundational truth that guides everything they do in their lives. Yeah. At their core, if your opinion is that they're not allowed to talk about that, you're asking them to surrender a foundational piece of who they believe they are.
Yeah.
And I would say like you'd have to be willing to not then share your foundational. You'd basically be outlining like, hey, don't talk about things you're passionate about. Right, because to
including
your point,
coexisting,
right?
Which I'm totally willing to have a conversation with you about, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Because based upon the merits of our discussions, I don't think your worldview holds up.
Right.
Yeah. So as we've been processing this question now, I always like to ask at the end, why is this question being asked, and are there even potential questions behind this question?
I hinted at this earlier, but I really do think that part of this question is due to, and I don't know how recently this has become the case, or this has been the case the whole time, and I just was ignorant of it. Maybe when I was younger, because I cared less about what people thought about me. Maybe I should go back to that. No, I'm just kidding. But I do think like currently our culture has like a difficulty like understanding that someone can disagree with you and like not hate you or be trying to like attack you. And by the way, I think this is oftentimes a reality even amongst Christians, where we can feel like, oh my gosh, this person disagrees with me on this particular doctrine or interpretation. Or I have to hate them, or they must hate me. Like we lose sight of the reality that we can have true disagreements. And in fact, I would say that's oftentimes where you truly see someone's character and how they relate, not by pulling punches or acting like the disagreements doesn't matter, but actually demonstrating that because whatever topic, in this case, Christianity, is so important to you, I'm actually willing to sit and have conversations with someone who has a completely different worldview, who thinks I'm utterly wrong, and subject myself to questions and kind of talking through where we're coming from, because I have hope that my conversations, our interactions, can actually lead others to be reconciled with God. And so that I think is a big part of it. And then I think some of it can be also learned. Like someone might be saying this or having this assumption, because I said the question was kind of like loaded with assumptions, because maybe the Christians that they've interacted with or that they've had in their lives have been Christians who just want to be divisive and want to be don't want to interact, don't want to talk to other people, just want to put others down, and maybe, like Kevin said, kind of heavy-handed or bullying, instead of having true good faith discussions and conversations. So I could totally see how someone who that's maybe their only interaction of this sort with Christians could come with the assumption of like, oh, of course Christians are, they can't get along with anybody. They're just hammers that see everybody as nails. And so I think those two are very possibilities with these questions.
Yeah. I think for me, and maybe I'm hopefully optimistic, but I think this question starts from a place of desiring harmony and respecting others. I do. I think like at least in our current cultural moment, I do think like a lot of people like want to at least be like nice, or like at least try to be. And for that, I'm really thankful. But ultimately, I think it ends up missing the mark, as it tries to force anyone with an exclusive truth claim to be silenced. Really, at the end of the day, personally, like personal opinion, I think people ask this question because, like, oftentimes they don't want to be confronted with some of the teachings of Christianity. They're uncomfortable. They want to live life however they deem appropriate and don't want to be challenged. And an easy way to challenge a Christian and not have to engage with the actual teachings of Christianity is to instead engage on the merits of whether or not we should be talking about our faith in the public sphere or not. Like, I don't have to deal with the fact that you think my condition is that of a sinner going to hell if the argument is instead about whether we should be talking about this at all, and whether it's just private and personal or whatever else. And so ultimately, I mean, and I've made this statement a couple times though, like, I think it's foolish. If our worldview and stances are not able to withstand scrutiny and challenge, are they really worth holding and believing?
Yeah. So, our hope as you process through this question is that we can come to a place where we know that we can process through what we believe and engage with others through our beliefs, through their beliefs, and really try to seek out the truth, right?
Yeah.
Like that's aletheia is the Greek word for truth. That is why we named our church that. Because at the end of the day, we are seeking truth, and we have come pretty confidently to understand that to be like the way of Christ as Christians. And so we are very confident in that and happy to talk with others about that. In fact, we desire to talk with others about that, and we are called to talk with others about that as Christ has called us. So, in this conversation, we we understand people come from a lot of different backgrounds, have a lot of different opinions, and maybe struggles with that. But, we ultimately don't seek to do it in hatred or in beating people down, but genuinely to bring them to the greatest truth we have ever discovered, which is the hope of Christ. Yeah. And that is our hope. We don't want to fight or fisticuffs with people, but just genuinely bring the hope of Christ and have a discussion and know that if we disagree at the end of the day, yes, we do believe there are consequences for that according to Scripture, but we ultimately know that, we do not hate people for what they hold, but we genuinely, want what is best for them, and we still love them even when we do disagree. And I think that's a beautiful call of Scripture.
Yeah. I think to maybe wrap this up, isn't Christianity exclusive? Yes. Mm-hmm. But it's open to everyone. Mm. And can't we all just get along? Yeah, absolutely. We can. As long as you're willing to have a conversation and not try to silence me, then yeah, absolutely.
And I do think that should give both, especially the Christian here, confidence in their faith, that this is something that is, like Kevin said, open and able to withstand scrutiny and thought and reason. God's not quaking in his boots that Christians have questions or are looking for answers, or that people are that does not put fear in him. It shouldn't cause fear in us. And if you're listening to this and you're a skeptic and you're like, I don't believe in Christianity, instead of wanting to just silence the argument, wouldn't you want to be sure that what you're running away from or shutting down is something that is untrue? Or do you want to live your entire life thinking, maybe I just punted or said no to the greatest truth that I could have ever gotten to learn or understand?
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, I hope you enjoy the shorter episode today. It's a pretty straightforward question. So, but as always, if you have further questions or would like to process through more, feel free to email us at podcast@aletheagainesville.com. We're happy to continue that conversation, or if you have ideas that are spurred on from this episode, please email us. We love to receive any and all emails. As always, please be looking out for the next episode, probably in about a month. Hopefully, we'll see. And just be following us on all the social media things like YouTube and Facebook and etc. And your favorite podcasting app, whatever you're listening to us on, you should like and subscribe. Yes, as you can tell, I'm a little rusty on social media these days. But we've absolutely had a pleasure talking about this, and we encourage you all to go and be the church. So I'm going to be honest, one of the greatest discoveries I've made for the Androids and for Google is the ability to schedule my text messages and my emails, so that as I'm working late at night, I'm like, I do not want to text someone, especially for support raising stuff. I don't want to text them at 11:30 p.m. So I schedule it to send at 8 a.m. and it's amazing.
Nice. Well,
yeah, that's
beautiful. And same with emails.
I just set a reminder to do things.
Apple has not done that yet. But I've been pushing for this. I've told multiple people that this is a very good idea. Right. Especially
years ago, Google used to steal things from Apple, but now it's the other way around, actually, in the OS.
Yeah. I mean, the nice thing about it, though, and why I don't just set a reminder, is because then I can script out my text while I'm decently cognizant and not have to worry about it in the morning.
You'll know highlight app, though. Sorry, Kevin.
Sad, man. I'm not gonna lie. I was deeply disappointed.
That's
probably the first time I've ever been mad I didn't have an Apple device.
My favorite app.
Yeah, I can imagine.